You think you understand reality because you can touch it, measure it, predict it. That confidence is exactly what keeps you blind. Space feels empty to you, time feels steady, matter feels solid, but none of these impressions are trustworthy at the deepest level. They are surface interpretations built by a brain designed for survival, not truth. And if you are honest for even a moment, you already feel the gap between what you assume and what you actually know. The universe does not behave the way your intuition expects. Space is not a passive void waiting to be filled. It is dynamic, flexible, and shaped by energy and mass in ways your senses cannot directly detect. Time is not a universal clock ticking the same for everything. It bends, stretches, and shifts depending on conditions you will never physically feel in daily life. And matter, the thing you trust most, is not truly solid. It is overwhelmingly empty structure held together by forces you cannot see, arranged in patterns that only appear stable from a limited perspective. Here is the uncomfortable realization you keep avoiding. What you call real is just what your brain has simplified enough to handle. You are not experiencing the universe directly. You are experiencing a compressed translation of it. And that translation hides more than it reveals. Every moment you assume stability, you are ignoring the deeper instability beneath it. Every moment you feel certain, you are standing on incomplete information. The most disturbing part is not that reality is complex. It is that your confidence grows in proportion to your ignorance. The less you understand, the more stable everything seems. But stability is not truth. It is limitation. And the moment you begin to question even the most basic assumptions about space, time, and matter, you realize something unsettling. Nothing is as fixed as you were taught to believe, including the version of reality you rely on to feel secure. You keep trusting your senses as if they are reporting truth directly, but they are only giving you a filtered summary. What you call solid is not solid at all. It only feels that way because forces are constantly resisting other forces at a scale you cannot perceive. The illusion of contact is just electromagnetic interaction between particles that never actually touch in the way you imagine. There is always space, always distance, always separation beneath what feels immediate. If you zoom into anything you consider real, the structure collapses into something unrecognizable. The atom, which you were taught as a tiny building block, is not a miniature object in the traditional sense. It is mostly empty space with a dense nucleus and rapidly behaving electrons that do not behave like tiny balls orbiting a center. They exist in probabilistic regions, not fixed positions. That means even the most basic idea of where something is becomes uncertain at the fundamental level. Here is the part your intuition refuses to accept. Solidity is not a property of matter. It is a result of forces preventing overlap. You are not touching objects. You are interacting with electromagnetic fields that repel each other at extremely small distances. The sensation of touch is your nervous system translating resistance into meaning. It feels definite, but it is built on invisible interactions that never become truly solid in the way you assume. And yet you build your entire confidence on this illusion. You trust objects more than principles, appearance more than structure. That is why reality feels stable to you, even though it is not stable in the way you believe. Everything you rely on physically is a temporary arrangement of energy behaving in predictable patterns, not fixed substance. The deeper realization is uncomfortable but unavoidable. There is no ultimate thing underneath what you see. There are only layers of interactions, fields influencing fields, probabilities collapsing into temporary outcomes. And the more you try to find something truly solid, the more it dissolves into something even more abstract. What you call reality is not a collection of objects. It is a continuous negotiation between forces that never stop moving, even when everything appears perfectly still. Space is not what your mind wants it to be. You imagine it as an empty container, a silent stage where everything happens. But that idea collapses the moment you stop accepting it blindly. Space is not passive. It is not neutral. It is not a fixed background waiting for objects to exist inside it. Space behaves like something alive in structure, constantly shaped by what exists within it. Mass and energy do not simply sit in space. They reshape it. They curve it, stretch it, distort it in ways your senses will never directly reveal. What you experience as gravity is not a pulling force in the traditional sense, but a result of this distortion. That means the ground you stand on is not simply holding you up. You are moving along a curved structure of space itself without realizing it. Your intuition calls it stability, but it is actually continuous geometric influence. This is where your everyday understanding begins to fail. You think distance is absolute, but it depends on the geometry of space. You think direction is fixed, but it changes with reference frames. You think you are moving through space, but space itself is also changing around you. There is no simple separation between object and environment. Everything is interconnected in a way that makes your mental model feel outdated the moment you try to simplify it. The harsh realization is that you are not inside space like a passenger inside a vehicle. You are part of the structure of space, moving through distortions that are constantly shaped by energy and mass around you. Even your most basic assumptions about here and there are not universal truths. They are local interpretations of a much deeper geometric system. And the most unsettling part is this: space does not need you to define it. It exists in a state of constant curvature and interaction, whether or not you observe it, whether or not you understand it. The illusion of emptiness hides a far more complex reality, one where space is not nothing, but an active participant in everything that exists. Time feels like the most reliable thing in your life, yet it is one of the least reliable aspects of reality. You assume it moves forward evenly, like a constant river carrying everything in the same direction at the same speed. That assumption feels natural only because your brain is trapped inside a narrow experience of it. But time is not that simple structure you imagine. It is flexible, conditional, and deeply dependent on motion and gravity. In different conditions, time does not behave the same way. It can stretch, compress, and shift depending on how fast something moves or how strong gravity is in a region. That means the now you experience is not universal, it is local. What feels like a single shared moment is actually a fragmented collection of different time experiences happening across the universe. There is no single clock that everything obeys. There is only relative progression, and that destroys the idea of a universal present moment. This is where intuition breaks completely. You think of your past as fixed and your future as open, but even that is a simplified narrative your mind constructs to survive confusion. At a deeper level, the separation between past, present, and future is not as clean as you believe. They are not separate compartments of existence. They are different perspectives on a continuous structure that does not behave like everyday experience suggests. The harsh truth is that your sense of urgency, delay, and timing is built on an illusion of uniform flow. You plan as if time is consistent for everything, but reality does not operate under that assumption. Time is not a universal backdrop. It is part of the system itself, shaped by conditions you rarely think about and cannot directly feel. And the most uncomfortable realization is this: you are not moving through a steady river of time. You are existing inside a framework where time itself bends differently depending on where and how you are. What you call right now is not a universal truth. It is a local experience inside a universe where even time refuses to stay simple. Matter is the most trusted illusion in your entire experience. You rely on it without question. You build your identity, your certainty, your understanding of the world on the assumption that things are solid, stable, and physically real in the way they appear. But that assumption collapses the moment you look deeper than surface perception. What you call matter is not a collection of fixed objects. It is a dynamic pattern of energy held together by forces that never stop acting. At the deepest level, there is no stillness. There is movement, vibration, interaction, and probability. Particles do not behave like tiny billiard balls sitting in space. They behave like possibilities distributed across regions, only becoming defined when they interact in specific ways. That means the thing you think you are observing is not fully defined until it is engaged with. Outside of interaction, it is not a fixed object in the way your intuition insists. This destroys the comfort of certainty. Because if matter is not truly solid, then nothing in your everyday experience is as permanent as it appears. Walls, bodies, structures, even your own physical presence are temporary arrangements of energy maintaining a form for a limited condition. The stability you feel is not permanence, it is balance. A constant negotiation between forces that are always active beneath the surface. Here is the part that challenges your assumptions most directly. Nothing you see is truly at rest. Even what looks perfectly still is a system of continuous internal activity. Atoms vibrate, fields fluctuate, interactions never fully stop. Stillness is not an actual state. It is a perception created by limits in your perception speed and scale. You are watching motion you cannot resolve and calling it stability, and the uncomfortable realization is unavoidable. If matter is not fundamentally solid, then the world you trust is not made of things in the way you think. It is made of relationships, interactions, and patterns that temporarily hold form. Everything you rely on physically is not a fixed object, but a temporary expression of deeper activity that never stops changing, even when everything appears completely still. Everything you assume about reality depends on one hidden rule you rarely question: that things exist independently of interaction. That assumption feels obvious, but it breaks the moment you examine how deeply observation is tied to definition. At the most fundamental level, nothing behaves like a fully defined object waiting to be discovered. Instead, properties become meaningful through interaction, not before it. This means reality is not simply there in a completed form. It is not a fixed structure waiting for you to notice it. It is a system where outcomes are shaped by engagement. What something is, in many cases, depends on how it is measured, influenced, or interacted with. Without that connection, it does not settle into a single definite state in the way everyday thinking assumes. That alone should disrupt the comfort of certainty you carry through life. You are used to believing that the universe continues exactly as it is even when nothing is observing it. But at deeper levels, that idea becomes far less straightforward. The act of interaction is not just passive awareness. It plays a role in defining what becomes real in measurable terms. That means reality is not entirely separate from participation. It is responsive in structure, even if not in the emotional or human sense you might imagine. Here is the uncomfortable shift. You are not just a viewer of a completed universe. You are part of the conditions under which certain outcomes become defined. That does not mean control in a personal sense, it means relationship. The system does not present fully fixed answers independent of engagement. It produces defined results through interaction patterns that cannot be ignored. And the deeper realization is this: the idea of a completely independent, fully formed reality existing exactly the same regardless of anything inside it may be too simple to describe what is actually happening. Instead, what exists is a layered system of potential states that become definite only through contact, measurement, and influence. Reality is not just observed, it is continuously shaped at its edges by the very act of engagement itself. The mind you rely on every day was never built to understand the universe at its deepest level. It was built to keep you alive in immediate physical environments where speed mattered more than truth. That is why it simplifies everything. It compresses complexity into manageable patterns, even if those patterns are incomplete or misleading. You don't experience reality as it is. You experience a survival-friendly version of it. This creates a dangerous illusion. Confidence feels like correctness. The more familiar something feels, the more true it seems to you. But familiarity is not evidence. It is repetition. And repetition often strengthens assumptions rather than accuracy. This is where your thinking quietly becomes trapped. You stop questioning not because you understand, but because your mind has labeled the experience as known. Here is a harsh realization you rarely confront. Your intuition is optimized for speed, not precision. It fills gaps instantly, even when information is missing. It creates certainty where there should be uncertainty. It draws lines where only probabilities exist. And because it does this automatically, you rarely notice how much of your worldview is built on shortcuts rather than direct understanding. This becomes even more limiting when you deal with space, time, and matter at deeper levels. Your brain tries to force these concepts into everyday categories, even when they don't belong there. It treats cosmic scale physics as if it should feel intuitive, and when it doesn't, you assume the problem is complexity rather than limitation. But the limitation is not in the universe, it is in the tool you are using to interpret it. And the most uncomfortable truth is this: certainty is not a sign of mastery. It is often a sign that you have stopped questioning. The moment you feel completely sure about how reality works without deeper examination, you are no longer exploring truth. You are reinforcing a model designed for convenience. And that model, while useful for survival, is not built for understanding what reality actually is at its foundation. The idea of common sense feels like a reliable guide, but in reality, it is just inherited agreement. It is a collection of simplified rules that work well enough for everyday life, not a reflection of how the universe truly operates. You trust it because it reduces confusion, not because it reveals depth. And that is exactly why it becomes a limitation the moment you step beyond ordinary experience. Common sense tells you that objects are solid, time is steady, and space is empty. It tells you that what you see is what exists, and what feels stable must be fundamentally stable. But every one of those assumptions begins to break down when examined closely. The deeper structure of reality does not follow the rules your instincts rely on. It operates on principles that feel unnatural only because your brain was never designed to interpret them directly. Here is the uncomfortable realization: you are constantly filtering reality through a system that prioritizes usefulness over accuracy. If something helps you navigate daily life, your mind marks it as true enough, even if it is incomplete or misleading at a deeper level. That means a large part of what you call understanding is actually practical approximation, not fundamental insight. This creates a hidden conflict inside perception. The same mind that helps you survive everyday tasks is the one you try to use for understanding the structure of the universe. But those are not the same goals. One prioritizes speed and efficiency, the other requires precision and discomfort. And when you force deep reality into a system designed for simplicity, distortion is inevitable. The harsh truth is that comfort and truth rarely align. The more something fits your intuition, the more likely it is shaped by limitation rather than depth. Real understanding often feels unstable at first because it breaks the patterns your mind depends on. It removes the familiar structure and replaces it with uncertainty, which your brain naturally resists. And the most unsettling realization is this: what you call obvious is not universal truth. It is just the level of reality that your mind can process without friction. Beyond that point, everything becomes less intuitive, less comfortable, and far more accurate than anything common sense will ever allow you to see. The most important shift in understanding reality begins with a simple but difficult acceptance. Perception is not truth. It is a translation. Everything experienced through the senses is processed, filtered, and reconstructed by the mind before it ever becomes reality in your awareness. That means what feels immediate and direct is already an interpretation, not the raw structure of existence itself. This interpretation is shaped by limitations you rarely notice. The brain reduces complexity because it cannot handle the full depth of information constantly flowing through the universe. So it compresses patterns, ignores most variables, and presents a simplified version that feels coherent. You do not see everything, you see what is necessary for functioning within a narrow range of survival-relevant reality. Here is the difficult realization. The feeling of clarity is not proof of accuracy. It is often the result of heavy simplification. The more reduced a system becomes, the more stable it feels. That stability can be misleading because it hides the amount of information that has been removed. What feels like understanding may actually be omission in disguise. This becomes critical when thinking about space, time, and matter. These are not directly experienced in their fundamental form. They are reconstructed models built from limited sensory input. The smooth flow of time, the solidity of objects, the emptiness of space, none of these are directly accessible truths. They are mental summaries created to make an overwhelming reality usable. And the deeper implication is uncomfortable. There is no guarantee that intuition aligns with structure. In fact, the more intuitive something feels, the more likely it is shaped by evolutionary convenience rather than physical accuracy. This means confidence in perception can easily become a barrier to deeper understanding. The most unsettling realization is this: what feels like seeing reality is actually experiencing a simplified interface. Behind that interface is a level of structure far more complex, less intuitive, and far less human-friendly than anything your senses will ever present directly. Everything collapses into a single point when the illusion is removed. Reality does not exist in the simplified form you have been using to navigate it. What feels stable is only stable because your perception filters out instability. What feels complete is only complete because your awareness is limited to a narrow slice of information. The deeper structure never stops moving, never stops interacting, and never stops changing beneath the surface of what you call normal. This is where the final contradiction becomes unavoidable. The same mind that demands certainty is also the reason certainty cannot be fully reached. It builds models to understand the world, but those models are always smaller than the system they describe. That gap is not a mistake. It is the nature of perception itself. You are always working with approximations, never the full structure. The harsh realization is that most of what feels like understanding is actually adaptation. The brain learns patterns that are good enough for survival, not patterns that reveal ultimate truth. That is why deeply accurate ideas often feel uncomfortable at first. They do not match the simplified framework your mind depends on to maintain stability. Truth disrupts that stability before it replaces it with something more precise. And here is the part that cannot be ignored. There is no final point where perception becomes perfect. There is no moment where everything becomes fully intuitive. The deeper the understanding, the less it resembles everyday experience. Reality does not converge toward simplicity. It expands into complexity that resists simplification at every level. This means the pursuit of understanding is not about reaching comfort. It is about tolerating the removal of comfort in exchange for accuracy. Every layer you uncover reveals another layer underneath it. Every certainty you remove exposes another assumption hiding below it. And the process does not end in familiarity. It ends in awareness of how much is still unknown. The final truth is this: reality is not designed to match your mind. Your mind is only designed to approximate reality well enough to function inside it. And the moment that distinction is fully understood, everything you thought was solid becomes something far more dynamic, uncertain, and infinitely deeper than anything perception alone could ever hold.